You know, history has a funny way of sticking with us. Sometimes it's the shocking moments that leave us speechless. Other times it's the little details we almost forget until we dig deeper. And when we do, the past doesn't just feel distant, it feels alive, messy. And honestly, a little terrifying. Welcome back to True Crime Echoes. Today we're taking a walk through some of the strangest, darkest, and most unexpected stories that shaped our world. From dictators with fake identities to socialites with disastrous parties, from women who changed history to villains who thrived on cruelty, this is a journey through truth, lies, and everything in between. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's uncover the stories that history books usually skip. Because once you hear them, you'll never look at the past the same way again. Chapter 1: Plot Twist Award. When I look back over this past season, I can't help but laugh at how many times history managed to pull the rug out from under us. You think you know where a story is going, and then suddenly, bam, a twist you never saw coming. That's why I thought it would be fun to start with what I like to call the Plot Twist Award. These are the stories that shocked me the most, not because they were complicated, but because the truth turned out to be so completely different from what we might expect. Take the story of Dr. J. Mortimer Granville. Back in the late 1800s, he invented what he proudly called Granville's hammer, known today as the world's first vibrator. Now you'd think logically that it was designed for women. That's the narrative we've been taught, right? That it was meant to treat hysteria in female patients. But here's the twist. Granville insisted it was for men only. According to him, it was supposed to cure things like constipation, toothaches, and even diabetes. I mean, imagine being told this brand new electrical gadget was for your aching molars. We all know that's not what was happening behind closed doors, and it's such a bizarre reminder of how medical history has always been tangled up with denial, shame, and double standards. Another wild twist came from weddings. We all think of bridesmaids as part of the ceremony, a tradition that's about pretty dresses and matching flowers. But originally, they weren't there to make the bride look good. They were there as bodyguards. Back in history, brides had to travel with money and gifts, and thieves knew this. So the bridesmaids dressed like decoys to confuse potential robbers, risking their own safety to protect the bride. When I first read that, I couldn't believe it. What we now see as a symbolic tradition actually began as a very real, very dangerous necessity. It makes you wonder how many of our rituals today started out of pure survival. And then there's mummy powder. This one still makes me shake my head. In the 1500s, Europeans were fascinated with ancient Egypt, but instead of preserving mummies in museums, they literally ground them into powder and ate them. Yes, ate them. The belief was that the resin and herbs used in mummification contained healing powers, so people thought consuming mummy dust could cure their illnesses. The reality? It didn't cure anything, it just gave them diarrhea. That's not exactly the miracle remedy they were hoping for. It's one of those historical moments that feels both grotesque and absurd, and yet it happened on a massive scale. These are the kinds of stories I live for because they remind me that history isn't a straight line. It's full of twists, turns, and contradictions. Whether it's a Victorian doctor pretending his invention wasn't what we all know it was, or bridesmaids secretly working as security guards, or Europeans literally snacking on mummies, these twists make us see the past in a whole new light. So the first award of the night, the Plot Twist Award, goes to Dr. Granville and his so-called hammer. Because honestly, nothing beats the irony of a man inventing the world's first vibrator and then insisting with a straight face that it had absolutely nothing to do with women. Chapter 2: The Biggest Flop and the Joanie Queen Award. Every season has its highs and lows, and this one was no exception. Some stories caught fire, with all of you sparking conversations, debates, and comments that just wouldn't stop. And then there were the flops. The ones I thought would be fascinating, but somehow didn't land the same way. Let's talk about the biggest flop first. That award goes to our episode on the art heist. I'll admit, when I first put it together, I was convinced everyone would love it. Art theft has glamour, mystery, even a bit of danger. But when the numbers came in, it was clear it just didn't grab people. Maybe it's because art history doesn't always feel personal, or maybe true crime fans prefer blood and betrayal over stolen paintings. Still, I think it says something interesting about how we connect with stories. What feels thrilling on paper doesn't always strike the same chord in real life. And honestly, that's part of the learning process, figuring out what resonates, what makes people lean in, and what makes them scroll away. Now, on to something much more inspiring, the Joanie Queen Award. This one honors the women in history who left a mark so strong it still echoes today. Narrowing it down was tough, but 3 names stood out. First, Ida B. Wells, a journalist and activist, a woman who risked everything to expose the brutal reality of lynching in America. At a time when speaking up could cost her life, she not only spoke, she shouted and forced the world to listen. Then there was Betty Dodson, an artist turned sex educator, who made it her mission to liberate women from shame. She spent decades talking openly about female pleasure in a society that didn't want to hear it, pushing boundaries and reshaping conversations about sexuality. And finally, Henrietta Lacks. She never set out to change the world she didn't even know she had. Henrietta was a young black woman whose cells, taken without her consent in 1951, became the foundation of modern medicine, the famous HeLa cells. They've been used in everything from developing the polio vaccine to cancer research, even to COVID-19 studies. Her story is equal parts inspiring and heartbreaking because while her cells helped millions, she never lived to see it, and her family wasn't compensated or even informed for decades. When I think about these women, I see courage in different forms. Ida fought with words, Betty with ideas, Henrietta with something she never even had the chance to choose. Each of them shifted history, even if society tried to silence or erase them. And the Joanie Queen Award, that honor, goes to Henrietta Lacks, because her impact is immeasurable. Without her, medicine as we know it would be decades behind. And yet her story also forces us to ask hard questions about ethics, consent, and who gets to benefit from scientific progress. To me, that duality, the gift and the injustice, makes her legacy impossible to ignore. So while some episodes may flop, others shine brighter than I could ever expect. And when we honor women like Henrietta Lacks, we're not just telling their stories. We're making sure they aren't forgotten. Chapter 3. Control Freaks and Historical Lies. Every time I look back at history, I'm struck by how often power and control walk hand in hand. And sometimes the people who claim they're guiding us toward purity or safety are really just trying to control every part of our lives. That's where the Control Freak Award comes in. Let's start with Sylvester Graham. His name probably sounds familiar because of the graham cracker, the snack we've all had at least once. But behind that innocent cracker was a man on a mission. Graham was a minister in the 1800s who believed that sin came from indulgence, especially sexual indulgence. To him, even something as natural as masturbation was self-pollution. His solution? A bland diet. He created the graham cracker as a way to promote purity, hoping people would be too full or too bored to give in to temptation. It's wild to think about because what we now see as a sweet childhood snack was originally a weapon in his moral crusade. Then there's Dr. Serranus, whose very name almost sounds like a cruel joke. He was an ancient Roman physician and is sometimes referred to as the father of gynecology. But his ideas deeply disturbing. He believed women's orgasms were a form of epilepsy, and he preached that virginity was the ideal state for women forever. Imagine building an entire medical philosophy on denying women their humanity and their pleasure, yet still being remembered as a pioneer. That contradiction says a lot about who gets to write history. And then we have Pope Innocent VIII, who, ironically, was anything but innocent. In 1487, under his authority, a book called Malleus Maleficarum was published. It was essentially a handbook for hunting witches, declaring that death was the only cure for witchcraft. The result, centuries of torture, burnings, and persecution of mostly women, all under the guise of religious righteousness. It's chilling to think about how one man's endorsement could set off waves of violence that lasted for generations. The winner of the Control Freak Award, Pope Innocent VIII. Because while crackers and bad science might be laughable today, his legacy of fear and brutality destroyed countless lives. Now, control is one thing, but what about deception? That brings us to the Everything is a Lie Award. History has a funny way of being rewritten, reshaped, and repackaged. until the truth is barely recognizable. Take New Year's Day, for example. Today, it's champagne countdowns and resolutions. But for millions of enslaved Black Americans in the 1800s, January 1st was hiring day. It was the day when enslaved people could be rented out to different masters for a year, often tearing families apart in the process. While the rest of the country celebrated fresh beginnings, they endured heartbreak and separation. That's not the kind of history we're taught in school, but it's the truth. Or think about Aladdin. Disney gave us a clever street kid from the Middle East, a story we assumed came from Arabian Nights. But here's the twist: Aladdin wasn't in the original collection at all. The tale was added by a French translator in the 1700s, and in the original version, Aladdin wasn't even Middle Eastern, he was Chinese. One little rewrite changed the entire cultural setting of a story millions now believe is authentic folklore. And then there's Michelle Remembers, a book from the 1980s that became a cornerstone of the Satanic Panic. It told the story of Michelle Smith, whose psychiatrist claimed to have uncovered repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse. The truth, it was fabricated, but at the time it spread fear like wildfire, leading to wrongful accusations, destroyed reputations, and a culture of paranoia. The winner of the Everything is a Lie award New Year's Day. Because that story forces us to confront the brutal realities hidden beneath the holidays we celebrate so casually. It reminds us that even moments of joy can carry deep scars depending on whose perspective you listen to. For me, both of these categories, control freaks and lies, show just how dangerous power and deception can be. Whether it's through religion, medicine, culture, or even holidays history, has been shaped not just by what happened, but by the stories people chose to tell. Chapter 4: Indifference and Cruelty. If there's one thing that truly unsettles me about history, it's not always the villains who act out of rage or lust for power. Sometimes it's the people who simply don't care. That apathy, this cold indifference to the suffering of others, can be just as dangerous as any act of violence. That's why I call this part the I Don't Give a Damn Award. Let's start with Coco Chanel. Yes, the Coco Chanel, whose name is now plastered on perfume bottles and handbags. During World War II, while Paris was under Nazi occupation, Coco got cozy with a Nazi officer. In fact, she even became a spy for Hitler. When the war ended, she denied it all and walked away unscathed, returning to the fashion world as if nothing had happened. Millions still wear Chanel No. 5, but behind that iconic fragrance is the stench of betrayal. It makes you wonder how much we really know about the luxury brands we idolize. Then there's President Woodrow Wilson. In 1919, the Red Summer brought brutal race riots to dozens of cities across the United States. Black communities were targeted, attacked, and terrorized. And Wilson, he sat back and did nothing. For 4 days in Washington, D.C., violence raged unchecked while the president stayed silent. By the time he finally responded, hundreds of lives had already been lost. Leadership isn't just about action, it's about timing. And Wilson's silence spoke volumes. And let's not forget the Coco brothers. These two men set up shop in New York in the 1800s, offering a revolutionary dental treatment. Quick, painless fillings that cost less and only took minutes to complete. Sounds amazing, right? Well, except for one detail, their fillings were made of toxic mercury. By the time people realized the danger, half of New York's adult population already had poisonous metal in their mouths. The Coco brothers, they didn't care. They made their money and moved on. The winner of the I Don't Give a Damn award, Coco Chanel. Because nothing says indifference quite like sleeping with the enemy and then denying it while the world tries to heal. But if indifference is chilling, cruelty is another level entirely. Some figures in history weren't content with ignoring suffering, they thrived on inflicting it. That's why we move now to the Sadistic Award. One name that stands out is Karl Hagenbeck, a German zookeeper in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He didn't just collect animals, he collected people. He brought individuals from colonized countries to Europe and displayed them in human zoos, treating them as exhibits instead of human beings. And when it came to animals, his methods were equally brutal. He was known for killing mother seals just to trick their pups into following him believing he was their caretaker. His legacy is a grotesque reminder of how cruelty can masquerade as entertainment. Then there's the infamous rat box. This torture device was deceptively simple. A metal box filled with rats would be placed against a victim's body. Heat applied to the other side of the box would send the rats into a frenzy, forcing them to claw and burrow their way through flesh to escape. It wasn't just punishment, it was designed to create terror before death. Devices like this tell us just how creative humans can be when it comes to causing pain. And of course, the Bermuda Triangle, a natural phenomenon turned legend. Ships and planes vanished without a trace, leaving behind only fear and speculation. Was it magnetic fields, bad weather, or something else? Whatever the cause, the Bermuda Triangle has earned its reputation for swallowing lives whole with no mercy and no explanation. The sadistic award, oddly enough, goes to the Bermuda Triangle. Not a man, not an invention, but a force of nature, or maybe mystery, that has claimed hundreds of lives and left us with no answers. Sometimes the unknown is the cruelest villain of all. Indifference and cruelty. They're not just chapters in history, they're warnings. They remind us of how easily humanity can look away from suffering or worse, take pleasure in it. And if we don't pay attention, those patterns have a way of repeating themselves. Chapter 5: Breakthroughs and Awkward Moments. Every season there are characters who catch us off guard, not because they're the obvious villains or the well-known icons, but because they step out of history in the strangest, most unexpected ways. I like to call this the Breakthrough Character Award. One of my favorites has to be Little Red Riding Hood. We all grew up with her story, right, sweet little girl, red cloak, big bad wolf. But when you peel back the layers, that Red Hood wasn't just a fashion choice. Some historians believe it symbolized a clitoris. Yes, you heard that right. Suddenly, the innocent stroll through the woods looks a lot more like a metaphor for puberty sexuality and all the hairy dangers that come with it. That's the thing about folklore, it's never as innocent as it seems. Then there's Dr. Louis Guyette. You probably wouldn't expect a scientist studying alligators to become a breakthrough character, but he did. His research into a Florida lake revealed that chemical waste from a perfume factory was messing with the alligators' hormones, making them infertile. The shocking part: those same chemicals were in our fragrances, our homes, our bodies. His work cracked open a truth that industries didn't want us to see, that our obsession with smelling good might actually be poisoning us. And then there's Esmeralda the dog. If you've never heard of her, you're not alone. But she played a strange role in history. Back in 1961, plastic surgeons wanted to test the world's first silicone breast implants. And who did they choose as their subject? A sweet, unsuspecting dog named Esmeralda. She became the first to walk the earth with silicone breasts. It's bizarre, it's cruel, but it's also one of those stories that makes you realize how far people will go in the name of progress. And the winner, Esmeralda. Because her story is so absurd and so heartbreaking that it's unforgettable. She didn't ask to become part of history, but she did, and in a way her story forces us to confront how much science has relied on exploitation, now from breakthroughs to awkwardness. Some moments in history are just so bizarre, so uncomfortable that you can't help but laugh even when you shouldn't. That's where the Most Awkward Moment Award comes in. Picture this: the Gilded Age, a lavish party thrown by a wealthy socialite named Mary Astor. She wanted her guests to be dazzled, so she imported thousands of butterflies from Brazil. The plan was to release them mid-party, filling the air with color and life. But when the net opened, the butterflies had all died fried under the heat of the lights. Instead of wonder, guests were showered with dead insects raining down from the ceiling. That is awkward. Then we go back even further to the Aztecs. In some ceremonies, names were randomly drawn to determine who would be sacrificed to the corn god. Being chosen was technically an honor, but imagine the dread, especially since the ritual often involved peeling the skin off the victim's body, meant to mimic stripping corn husks. Symbolism aside, that's one awkward way to spend your last day alive. And finally, communal pooping. Yes, it was once completely normal. In medieval castles, people gathered in large rooms with multiple toilets, side by side, No stalls, no privacy. You might be relieving yourself next to your cousin, your coworker, or even a stranger. Imagine making eye contact across the room while, well, doing your business. The award for most awkward moment, Mary Astor's Dead Butterflies. Because there's just something about that image, rich guests in fancy clothes, champagne in hand, suddenly covered in little corpses, that perfectly captures the absurdity of high society. History gives us breakthroughs that shock us and moments that make us cringe. But both remind us that the past was messy, unpredictable, and often stranger than fiction. Chapter 6. Fan Favorites and Final Reflections. Every season, no matter how many stories I tell, there are always a few that stand out episodes you watch and rewatch, the ones that spark comment, threads, debates, and even a little bit of obsession. These are the fan favorites. The first nominee is Betty Crocker. Now, we all know her as the smiling face of American baking, but here's the kicker: she never existed. She was an invention of General Mills, a character created to sell cake mixes and packaged products. Millions of people wrote letters to her, asked her for advice, even cried when they found out she wasn't real. A corporate ghost haunting kitchens for decades. Then there's Joseph Stalin. As dark as his story is, he drew people in. He wasn't just a dictator. He was a man who engineered famine-ordered mass murders and let his own son die in a concentration camp. He checked every dark history box, and yet some people still admired him. His presence loomed large, and maybe that's why the episode resonated. It forced us to face the uncomfortable truth about power and cruelty. And finally, Lisa Frank. For many of us, her name brings back childhood memories, bright colors, rainbow unicorns, glittery dolphins plastered on school supplies. But behind the sparkle was a storm. Lisa was pushed out of her own company by her husband, a man consumed by drugs and control. Her fight to take it back was just as messy and colorful as the brand itself. It was nostalgia, but with a dark twist, and maybe that's why it stuck with so many of you. And the fan favorite award, it goes to Lisa Frank. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected stories, ones that blend innocence and chaos, are the ones we connect with most. Now let's talk about the thread that wove through almost every episode this season: ancient Egypt. 13 times, to be exact. Whether it was mummies turned into medicine eyeliner trends that still shape beauty today, or amulets believed to hold magic, Egypt was everywhere. They were the icons of their time, trendsetters, innovators, and mysteries wrapped in gold. It's almost impossible to talk about history without finding Egypt somewhere in the background. Finally, as I look back on this season, I think about the moments that stuck with me long after the camera stopped rolling. There was the story of Attis, who cut off his own genitals in a fit of divine madness, giving us a shocking origin for the Christmas tree. There was the Titanic's role in inspiring the 911 emergency number, a reminder that tragedy can reshape entire systems. And there was the truth about candles, those cozy little flames that can actually poison the air we breathe. These aren't just stories, they're reminders that history is wild, unpredictable, and always more complicated than we think. As we close this chapter, I'm left with a feeling that's hard to shake. We laughed, we cringed, we questioned. But most of all, we learned. And isn't that the whole point? To dig into the past, not to glorify it, but to understand it, and maybe even make sense of the world we're living in now. So here's my final toast to Season 2, to the stories that shocked us, the characters who surprised us, and the truths that refused to stay buried. Because history isn't just in books, it's alive, it's messy, and it's waiting to be told. And that brings us to the end of this wild ride. Looking back, it's clear that history isn't just about dates or dusty facts, it's about people. People who shocked us, people who inspired us, and yes, people who horrified us. Some left behind legacies of hope, others trails of destruction, but all of them remind us that the past is never as simple as it seems. If there's one thing to take away from tonight, it's this: the truth is often stranger, darker, and more powerful than fiction. And by remembering it, by telling these stories, we make sure those echoes of the past don't fade away. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of True Crime Echoes. If you enjoyed this journey through history's shadows, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share which story stuck with you the most. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop questioning the world around you.